I have this ambition to stretch the entire team into thinking about a new horizon and always sort of look over the edge of that horizon a little bit further than they might have thought they could have gone before. I actually have a major flaw, Tom, in that I have this desperate optimism and an incredible optimism in what we could do in the future and the direction that we should aim to. And I've always had this belief that it's better for us to aim for the stars and land on the moon than it is to underestimate what we can achieve. And oftentimes we'll surprise ourselves. And so one of the things that I've always enjoyed is finding a way to be able to stretch the team into a new way of thinking about what they could deliver themselves and how, when they're operating at full chat, and how if they're optimally served by the company and served by the systems that support them, they could do such incredible things. And so there's I have a wonderful relationship with my sales operations team, who are always able to give me the pragmatic and the practical sense of what can and can't be delivered. But I have this ambition to stretch the entire team into thinking about a new horizon and always sort of look over the edge of that horizon a little bit further than they might have thought they could have gone before. So yeah, that certainly would be, I think, an important component in the way that I'd have built out the revenue plan and the strategy aligns to that kind of rocket ship model. Certainly in eDesk, where I am at the moment, we have a very clear view of what this rocket ship could do. It's not something that's looking to just do a nicely tracked year-over-year growth, but it's how high could the trajectory go, and then challenging the team to try to address that high-class problem.
That's really fascinating. So it's like your natural optimism, positivity actually feeds its way into your strategy, and it's your route to having like top performance.
I think it's important to stretch them, but I think also too, it's important to make sure that it's realistic.
Yeah.
There's a way that we then need to be able to break it down. And one of the challenges, and I said it openly at the start, it's one of my acknowledged weaknesses, is at times I can go very quickly from the micro to the macro and lose those steps in between. So it's important to be able to digest how we get over the horizon or how we get to that new destination by breaking it down into tangible and bite-sized chunks for everybody to be able to understand and to be able to connect to, so that we're able to celebrate the little goals, we're able to celebrate the steps that we're taking, and and then arrive at a hopefully brand new future that we couldn't have otherwise achieved.
Yeah, that is it does make it an interesting theme, right? Because when I speak to leaders, for them, data is often the way to cut through the fluff, like see what's real.
Yep.
But the interesting thing about your approach is you're combining, like you said, a pragmatic approach, something that's going to be realistic, with like a very strong vision, you might say, actually, of what we want to do. And I think the combination of those two things is quite fascinating.
I think, the data points that we have of what we've been able to achieve up to this point give us an indication of where we've come from and where we've got to. And they absolutely are an important part of understanding the trajectory that the business is on, or the team is on, or the strategy is on. But in order for us to be able to point towards something that's exciting and interesting and compelling and attractive for the team to really step up to, we need to be able to dot that out to the future. And yeah, projections, and yes, the data set that we've built in the previous number of months or years in the company will give us a very clear indication of how we've been able to build blocks before. But at times too, Tom, there's a challenge in that when we look back at data and we don't try to take it and then project it forward, we wind up with a model that is constrained by what we've done before, and constrained in a way that might limit the ambition of the team, or limit the opportunity, or limit your ability to go after the opportunity that's out in the market.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because people do talk about combining the art and the science, Richard. And I love that phrase you had. So looking beyond the horizon of what we might think is possible, just seeing a little bit further ahead. It sounds like you're right. There is limits to data. And it sounds like through a long career and lots of experience, you can see where those shortfalls in data are and perhaps where the future could be that the data isn't suggesting. Would love to open that up a bit more. I mean, is that assessment correct from me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there is a balancing act, and at times, again, the constraint that we need to have is, there's no good in having pie in the sky projections and the grand imagined future without it actually having some foundation in fact. So the need to be able to work with a very strong and robust and trusted data source is incredibly important.
Yeah.
One of the things that over and over again in my time and any of the businesses with which I've worked is this constant reliance upon the trust that you have in the data. And the difficulty can be if you second guess yourself as you're making assessments on where you are or where you've come from, you're also going to be making assessments just as you leap off into the future and head towards the goal that you've set yourself. And if you are second guessing it because you don't trust the data that you've been making the assumptions on, you're goosed. And that will mean that the team will query and be concerned about the accuracy of the projections, and so it's become very, very important to firstly ensure that you have a very well trusted source of data, and oftentimes that can be a challenge for small companies. And I saw it within eDesk when I joined the business, and I saw it with the many companies that I had the opportunity to work with in Salesforce. Because the opportunity that I had there wasn't just to be able to work within what is the most data intense sales machine I've ever experienced, but also to be able to have that chance to engage with companies that were going through growth pains and challenges that were, they had a vision, they had a view of what they wanted to do, how they could transform their industry or their business. But they had to have very clear data sets and very clearly defined ways of being able to understand their customer or understand their market or understand the behaviors of their team. And oftentimes they have different silos and different systems of record or different kind of pieces of the puzzle that don't connect together. And that can be incredibly difficult to make accurate calls on and trust the foundation that you are jumping from today into the future.
Yeah, it's that final line is good, Rich. Yeah, jumping from today into the future. I suppose it's interesting because as a CRO, you're one of the main people who are going to make that call. Obviously, alongside your team, you're going to make that call. Where are we going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, it's top of mind for early stage companies where they might not even have that much data, to be frank. And you're right, but they still have to plan. They still have to strategize. So, what have you seen in the past, Richard? How do you get your organization ready in a place to collect good data, be in the position where they can make those assessments? And what do they do in the in-between time before they get there?
As much, I think it's almost a fundamental investment that businesses fail to make, and I think the businesses that fail to make it will in the midterm struggle to scale. And the fundamental investment has to be in making sure your data is correct, making sure that your data is aligned, making sure that you have a golden thread in effect of how exactly your data connects the customer story, your internal team's way of working, and any of the projections that you're going to make. And people, some companies and teams make, I believe, the mistake of operating without having taken that data integrity to heart, and then they find themselves with a rounding error or a blind spot in the data that suddenly comes up and bites them at the backside, or worse, actually, if you have a situation where your team are misaligned because they don't all agree that this is the truth. And if you don't have a single source of truth, a single source of being able to say this is what our business currently looks like, then it's very, very difficult to make any decisions that are going to scale in the long term. They'll fall apart at some point. So I think if I was to look at any of the companies that I've had the opportunity to work with, either on a consulting basis or as a team member, it's being able to make that definite investment in a strong data set and or at least in a single view of a customer or an interaction.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point, because you're right. Like, data is empirical, but at the top level, it's human as well, and it's interpretive. And I suppose, one of the roles of a CRO is to align people around the data, not just how you collect it, but also how we understand it and the stories we think it tells. That's kind of a cultural piece. And I'd be interested to learn more about how you do that work.
So, I understand the question, Tom. So
yeah, no, fair point. Basically what I'm asking is, you pointed to before that there's culture around understanding data, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
People can take different stories from it. Cultures need to be aligned in how to understand and use it. As the CRO, how do you align the culture? How do you set the culture? How do you get alignment around interpreting the data?
Once you've got over the first hurdle of making sure that you all trust the same data set and that you're all looking through the same lens at the data, rather than it being something that you've your point of view and I've mine, and the old analogy of I'm grabbing the trunk and you're grabbing the leg and she's grabbing the tail. Once you've aligned on what that looks like, it becomes relatively easy then for you to be able to set a culture. If you can together, working together, find a way to paint that picture of what's over the horizon, then you can get a team that become intrinsically motivated to go over it themselves and get excited about it. And they can believe in that excitement. It's a difficult thing if they're going to be sold on a vision from me or from somebody else in the leadership team. They need to actually fundamentally get it in their belly and know that at a culture, at a central level, this is something that we can achieve, and these are things that we can do to be able to achieve a great goal. And that's I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, Tom, but I think giving people a solid view of what exactly the current state is and helping make sure that they trust that is hugely important to just getting people aligned.
Okay, so trust is the theme we keep on coming up with, isn't it, here, Richard? Like, that's really important for us.
Yeah.
And also not just the trust, but building the belief in the mission. It sounds like they're kind of key ways of how you work and how you lead.
Very much so.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. I wanted to tackle here the middle piece. It's the handoff from the strategy you devise and the data you look at to do that, to actually the tactical and on the ground to make sure it's implemented. How do you handle that key handover?
It is. It's got to be done. Imagine it as though we're building a bridge between the strategy and the tactics, and they're on opposite sides of this. There's a divide between the two. You need to make sure that you're coming from the bottoms up and the top down. You're coming in with not just a strategy that's beamed in from above, but it's also built on the fundaments of what the team can tactically deliver. And so you need to be able to in my opinion, be able to build a bottoms up and top down analysis and be open to finding adjustments that will need to be made to make sure those two can come together. I think oftentimes there can be a mistake made where a top-down strategy is carved and dropped onto a team to execute in a tactical way, and it just doesn't align with what the team are actually seeing on the ground or what they're going to be able to deliver themselves. And similarly, if a team are asked to build a long list of tactics, they will stop, start, jam on the brake, jam on the accelerator. You need to make sure that those two pieces are coming together, and the only way to do it is to have an open conversation about that bottoms up and top down view. So, and again, that can lead to a certain amount of rounding error as you look at two potentially different, either qualitative or quantitative views of what the business opportunity might be or what your key parameters of your business are, and that takes a conversation with the teams and an openness to being wrong in the assumptions that you might have made, an openness and a willingness to ideate about what the best way to do things could be. And then hopefully getting that bridge to lock so that both top down and bottom up trust the other side. And it doesn't feel like there's a big disconnect from what's being done on the ground or on a day-to-day basis and what's being asked for by the ELT or by the C-suite or the board. So it's, I think that kind of playoff sometimes is missing, where there's a dropped down view of what we need to do that doesn't actually tie to what is practically deliverable by the on the ground team. And that's where pain can start on both sides. You can't execute on a strategy that the tactics and the team don't actually buy into or connect to. And similarly, if you continue to be tactical, you're going to wind up just repeating mistakes and never quite connecting to that bigger picture. So yeah, I think being able to link those two is important.
How do you know when the bridge is locked?
I think when you get that's again in part maybe going back to culture, Tom, or maybe going into that kind of feeling of what it takes to become a high functioning team.
Yeah.
You'll know when you're at a point where where each side of the divide is bought into what could be done.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's been sold to them, but they've bought into it, and they each believe that they can deliver on it. So that takes conversation, and it takes collaboration, and it takes, again, a certain humility that neither side has the absolute right answer. It needs to be something that's done in a very aligned and team-oriented way.
The interesting thing, I suppose, is how that works as a company scales. You know, you can imagine this working really well on when we're slightly smaller. And then I guess the question is, what's the cadence to keep that alignment as we get bigger and we get a little further away from the ground? Maybe that can maybe happen.
Yeah, but I used to look at it within Salesforce. They had a wonderful system called their V2 MOM. And their V2 MOM was this idea of effectively a business plan written by the CEO, setting up the vision, values, the methods, obstacles, and measurements. That was his business plan for the year, was the full summation of it. And his direct reports had to write from that their own V2 MOM, and in turn their own, and all the way down. And everybody in the organization had at one point or other through the year to write their V2 MOM. And it was a wonderful way to be able to kind of connect the tactics and strategy right up through a large organization. And I used to find it incredibly useful to be able to see this big picture that my leadership level would have had, and then to be able to make sure that it was communicated in an open and transparent way to the team that I led. So in those bigger organizations, I don't think those bridges need necessarily just be one span. They need to be repeated, but they absolutely need to be built and reviewed and be real, really trusted in pieces of kind of cultural infrastructure in a business.
Okay, and that's actually a really cool way to get your people thinking strategically, which is great. If that's going down to the individual rep, that's like really good training almost.
Think about it. If we wind up with a tactic driven rep, or a tactic driven BDO, or anybody through the organization at the earlier stages of their career, if they're solely tactical, then really they're just going to hit a button until they're told to stop. And that's not great for them or for their own professional development. What you almost need to do is have those tactics, the monthly plan or the quarterly plan that links to an annual plan, a strategy that is useful for the role, and then further link it into their professional development plan. And so that they have that view of, this is what I need to do for the job, this is how I build my career, and this is where I want to go as a person. And so if you link those pieces internally and help all the team members do that, I believe you become a very strengthened and powerful organization.
I really appreciate that, Richard. It's actually giving me something to think about. Final question for you. If you're in a room full of the best revenue leaders, whether that's CROs or anyone else, if you're in a room with these folks, what would you ask them?
What would I ask them? I'd ask them about the mistakes that they'd made, and I'd ask them about the things that hadn't gone right. And I mean that, Tom, in the way that I think I've probably learned more from the things that I failed at than I have from the things that I've done well. And I think that there's I would imagine that many, if not all, of the leaders that would be in that room would have failed multiple times. And only by doing it would they have been able to get into the space they're in. So I think it's something we don't talk about enough, or we don't open enough about, is the things that we've dropped the ball on, or where we have where it hasn't all gone according to plan. Because strategy is a living and breathing piece. Building out a company or a team or a go-to-market is something that is, again, as you said, it's art and science, and a lot of the art comes from having taken some knocks. So if I was with them, I'd probably ask them about the times they failed. Try to figure out how they learned their lessons and what hard yards they put in to be able to get to the level they're at.